And we are live from Bloomberg's world headquarters in New York City. I'm Matt Miller.
And I'm Tim Stenevec. Welcome to Bloomberg Crypto, a look at the people, transactions, and technology shaping the world of decentralized finance.
President-elect Trump picks Paul Atkins as his choice to lead the SEC, suggesting 4 years of relaxed policy and enforcement for crypto firms to hedge funds.
And in just a moment, we speak with Kraken Co-CEO David Ripley to get his thoughts on the SEC pick as he calls the U.S. election a turning point for the industry.
And speaking of that election and Donald Trump's fresh pro-crypto stance, you'll hear later in the program from Eric Trump, Donald's son, who calls himself a Bitcoin believer.
All that ahead over the next half hour right here on Bloomberg Crypto. First, though, a snapshot of the market. And, well, it finally happened. Bitcoin hitting $100,000. Here in New York, it was the evening of last Wednesday, actually staying above $100,000 for a couple of days there, going above $103,000 last week before settling back, coming back to earth a little bit, settling in these last couple of days at just about $95,000 to $98,000. Right now, Bitcoin at $96,000, Matt.
Yeah, and I find the flows, Tim, into ETFs so interesting to watch. Overall, of course, we hit $1 trillion of flows into ETFs this year, and that has been helped greatly by Bitcoin ETFs. Net inflows were $10 billion last week, and that brings the total since these ETFs were created to over $110 billion in Bitcoin assets.
Well, with all of this enthusiasm about crypto right now, Bloomberg caught up with the CEO of Binance, who took a step back to comment on how far crypto has come just this year.
If you tell people before 2024 Bitcoin will hit 100,000, there'll be ETF being approved for Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, and several others. And as well as institutions, I mean, the largest asset manager in the world, BlackRock, has gone from a skeptic to believer. I think people will not believe it.
And in just the last week, we learned that Paul Atkins is President-elect Trump's choice to lead the SEC, and venture capitalist David Sachs will serve as Trump's AI and crypto czar. These moves could be significant for companies like Kraken, a popular crypto exchange. Joining us now is Dave Ripley, co-CEO of Kraken. Dave, good to have you back with us. What does Trump's pick mean for Kraken?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on, guys. Yeah, look, I think there's just a huge amount of positivity now in the industry. I mean, we've been in an environment that is incredibly challenged for the past year and a half, 2 years. Things like, the belligerent Gary Gensler leading the SEC, the covert Operation Choke Point 2.0. And now with this election, it starts and ends with President Trump, but there are many other pro-Bitcoin cryptocurrency candidates that won and defeated those that were opposed to the industry. And now it continues with the appointments, as you noted. Paul Atkins, I mean, fantastic. We now have even a role such as crypto and AI czar for the administration. So I think the positivity is just really fantastic to see, particularly after what we've been through as an industry over the past couple of years.
Are there any concerns, David, that turns around? I mean, I remember when Gary Gensler came into office and we thought he was going to be pro-crypto. He had taught a course on crypto. He clearly understood the market, and we expected the industry as well, and then proceeded to put up every roadblock he possibly could to try and stunt the industry's growth.
Yeah, look, I think our optimism here is really strong for what we see. I mean, we've been in a situation where we've communicated directly with a number of the individuals that won in this election cycle, a number of the individuals that are, being appointed now. And so we think the support is genuine, and we're, really optimistic about it going forward. I think, what we saw last, couple years or so was, politically motivated and a lot of different other, reasons that we don't expect to see going forward.
Well, Kraken, as a company, has ongoing litigation with the SEC. Sued it last year. It alleged that Kraken operated as an unregistered exchange, broker, dealer, and clearing agency. Then back in February of 2023, close to 2 years ago, you guys settled separate charges with the SEC over your staking business. Do you expect to settle the SEC case now?
Well, look, we expect to have a positive outcome on the SEC case. And, frankly, even before the election and the administration change and all these recent changes, we are very resolute that we're going to have a positive outcome, win this case. And now with the administration change, if anything, this is, a positive tailwind. So we're still expecting and know we'll have a positive outcome to this dispute with the SEC.
What does a positive outcome mean to you?
So a positive outcome, first and foremost, is that we're able to run our business in the compliant way that we run it today. And that means continuing to operate our business, provide access to trading and all the other functionality that we offer to clients today. And so I think that's the number one goal, and that's what we're going to be pushing for, regardless of whatever path this takes.
So what does that mean in terms of the products that you can trade? Will you be able to offer a full and broad spectrum of crypto products, including NFTs?
Generally, yes. Look, today we offer, well over 200 tokens, and we have plans and a roadmap this year to grow that number to north of 300. And so, yes, absolutely. It is kind of a continued path of launching new products and services in the crypto space. And so I think trading and exchange is our core product, but there's a number of other products that we have on the horizon, including those in the decentralized space, on-chain, things like providing clients access to DeFi, which we see as a fantastic opportunity in a space of the industry that just continues to grow.
By the way, we've seen so much growth in not just Bitcoin, but since the election, a number of other lesser coins is the way I would see it, have risen even faster than Bitcoin in terms of pricing. Do we still see as much interest in things like, decentralized products like DAOs? Do we still see as much interest in things like NFTs as we do in, the OG crypto?
So I think the answer is both, really. Look, if you go all the way back and look at the, the core of how this, new technology was founded, Bitcoin. Incredible new innovation, fantastic value for all users of Bitcoin, store of value, means of global payment, really the best form of money that has ever existed. And then in addition, there's a huge amount of innovation in the space. I mentioned DeFi. This is an area where we're particularly interested in. And so now within the world of DeFi, there are decentralized exchanges where individuals can exchange one token for another without any intermediary involved whatsoever. Also can go and actually obtain a loan without any specific intermediary involved either, just all on a decentralized network. And so we think there's continuing amount of innovation in this area, continuing amount of adoption, and a lot of that is predicated on different new chains, different new tokens out there. And so, yes, I think it's a both. Really, there's we could go on forever about the fantastic properties of Bitcoin, but also the new innovation in other areas is important.
But the reason I ask is that it's only 2 weeks ago that you shut down your NFT trading business. So does that change in a new SEC in a month and a half?
So the decision there not related to anything regulatory related at all. That was really about focusing our business on the areas that we think are going to be the highest growth in this space. And so we have a long history of serving individual investors and traders. We see great opportunities to do that, as I mentioned, in the DeFi area. And so we're really looking to, invest in the highest, ROI areas where we can provide the most value to our customers. So I think that's really all that's about.
Matt mentioned you guys shutting down your NFT marketplace. A lot of news happening inside the company. Now there's a co-CEO. That was just in the last few weeks that was announced. The company also announcing that it's laying off 15% of its employees. Is this reorg? Is this streamline? Is this co-CEO? Is this all in preparation to go public soon?
Yeah. So let me see a couple of questions. So one, I'll tackle the hey, what was this reorg about, and then two, the IPO question. So one, the reorg. Yes. Look, this is all about, for us, driving further agility and speed of execution for the business. So we really flatten the organization, bringing leadership much closer to the individuals that are actually driving in building the products and running the marketing programs and driving the outcomes. And we did this across the board. So it was very much about positioning the company for agility and faster execution going forward with an eye towards growth. And so we expect to invest meaningfully in a lot of new products in the coming year and reach into even potentially new geographies. And so I think it's really a move that positions ourselves for growth, which sets up well with this market.
So yes or no on an IPO moving forward?
Yeah, and then the IPO, not surprised to hear you ask the question about IPO. Look, we're well over $1 billion in revenue, profitable company, high growth company. And so these fit the financial profile of a company that would go public. We're not actually releasing any kind of specific timelines with regard to IPO, but we're definitely exploring and always are exploring private and public markets to obtain the resources best needed to grow this business.
If you don't end up going public in the next year or two, do you anticipate that you'll have to tap markets again, or at least tap venture capitalists again? You said you're profitable. Are you done raising venture capital?
Yeah. So the answer is, again, a bit of both. So we are profitable, and we frankly have been profitable for most of the history of the company. And the company really hasn't raised a significant amount of capital since going back nearly 10 years ago at this point, back to, the 14, 15 timeframe. So it's been a story of a company that's, highly profitable, self-funded. That said, for things like in preparation to going public, tapping the private fundraising markets are, a potential opportunity for us also to, just fund further growth, M&A or other opportunities that we have. So it's definitely on the table.
All right, a big thank you. Dave Ripley, co-CEO of Kraken, joining us out there in San Francisco. Do appreciate that. Well, coming up, we continue this conversation on Trump's picks for crypto regulation leadership. We do that with Sheila Warren. She's the CEO of the Crypto Council for Innovation.
And we're going to hear from Eric Trump, as I said, the president's son. He spoke to Bloomberg about why he is a big Bitcoin believer.
And to access all of the latest data and news on crypto, check out CRYP Go on the terminal. This is Bloomberg.
There are probably respects in which crypto has been over-regulated by overzealous regulators. But some of what is being said, this idea that we should have some kind of national Bitcoin reserve, is crazy.
That was former U.S. Treasury Secretary Larry Summers with a sweet beard speaking on Wall Street Week and strongly dismissing the idea of the U.S. government setting up a reserve of Bitcoin assets.
Joining us now for more on this idea and the future of crypto, we got back with us Sheila Warren, the CEO of the Crypto Council for Innovation. Crazy to have a national Bitcoin reserve is what we just heard from Larry Summers speaking last week on Wall Street Week. What do you make of that? Is it crazy, or is it something we need here in the U.S.?
Well, first of all, I'm glad you commented on the beard, so I don't have to, because that was quite a look.
That was Matt.
That was Matt.
Just to clarify for everybody, that was Matt Miller.
Thanks, Matt, for your astute observation as always. Look, do I think it's crazy? I think that it depends on how you think about Bitcoin, right? And so as we've seen more acceptance, including from the Treasury Secretary, including from the Fed chair, just to this idea that Bitcoin is digital gold and it functions more like gold than anything else, the idea of a reserve becomes, I think, less crazy, to use Larry Summers' terminology. And I think you have to decide, as a government, and we have to decide as kind of as a global economy, where are we going to put our focus, where we're going to put our attention. To the extent that you thought gold was crazy, you might think Bitcoin's crazy. To the extent you think they're analogous, you'll have a different opinion. So it doesn't surprise me that that's Larry Summers' take on the concept, but I think it's completely reasonable to have a very different perspective on that, as many do.
A cynic might say that doing that would remove supply from the Bitcoin that's out there and just cause the price to go higher, making a select group of people even wealthier.
A cynic or a bull.
Or a bull would say that.
Or a bull, yeah, big boulder.
How would you reply to somebody who's a cynic saying, there's really no use for this in terms of the U.S. stockpiling except to make some people really wealthy?
Yeah, again, I think it comes back to this concept of how you feel about gold. The same arguments could have been made historically and also, frankly, probably today. I can't say I'm following who the whales of gold are very closely, but I'm sure there are some outsized holders of gold as well. And I think it all comes back to fundamentally this question around US dollar dominance and how you want to ensure that the US remains the world's global reserve currency. And if Bitcoin can be an adjacency to that and help support that proposition, then, I think there's a logic to that. But yeah, I can certainly see why a cynic or critic of this opportunity would have skepticism about it. And personally, I don't know that it falls as the number one priority we have in the crypto policy space versus an idea that I think merits discussion and is of interest.
Yeah, I've noticed that, Sheila, a lot of even big holders in this space, Michael Novogratz, for example, don't put a lot of faith in the idea of a crypto reserve. But then last week we heard Vladimir Putin talking about it. And I feel like the first time I ever thought about the idea that countries would use it as a reserve was when the U.S. started to put real restrictions on Russia's dollar reserves. The whole point of this is that no government can censor it, right? And that's what we try and do with the dollar. What do you think we need to do to reach a critical mass? I mean, if the U.S. and Russia start to build reserves, I know it's a big if, but if that happens, I mean, everyone else is going to follow, right?
Yeah, well, look, I'll just say that I think the priority here ought to be U.S. dollar dominance and ensuring that the U.S. dollar, for a variety of reasons, for national security reasons, for sanctions-related reasons, for global macroeconomic reasons, I think that should be a priority. And again, I think there are arguments to be made, and they're being made by some, about why a Bitcoin strat reserve would support that. But I think if that's the focus, the most important thing we could do is land stablecoin regulation, okay? So right now, we know that in circulation, we're under circulating essentially US dollar coins of various kinds, dollar-pegged stable coins. There is tremendous demand for those as the engine of the digital economy. And the question becomes, what is the parameter around which their issuance, around which they're kept? All of those are really, really important questions. And we don't have those resolved in the United States. So in my view, that is extremely and extraordinarily important policy question that remains open. And I'm hopeful that we'll kind of see that resolved in the earlier part of this new administration.
Can I just get your take on the fear of crowding out of these mega whales or megalodons, holding massive piles of Bitcoin? Does that matter? Because obviously, these coins can be broken up into Satoshis and maybe even smaller pieces if necessary. Do they get with a huge holding? Does Michael Saylor have some kind of outsized influence on Bitcoin?
Matt, you're nailing it. That's a great question. And no, right? So the governance of Bitcoin is fully free and fair. And that's part of what makes Bitcoin such a compelling opportunity. I should also note, anyone can theoretically buy some sats. I think the price of Bitcoin might preclude certain folks from owning a whole Bitcoin if they come to the market new right now. But anybody on the open market can purchase sats and be part of this opportunity. It's not closed in any way. It's not a cabal, of folks that control who has access to it. So I think this is it's a more democratic opportunity, frankly, for wealth building, if that's the concern. But yes, to your specific question, no, there is no governance mechanism that gives the Mickey Saylors of the world outsized democratic votes or whatever, right, in the way that Bitcoin is issued, in the way that Bitcoin's maintained, et cetera. It is the purest form, I think, of financial opportunity that I think exists in the world today at the current moment.
Sheila, great talking with you again. Thanks so much for joining us. Sheila Warren, they're the CEO of the Crypto Council for Innovation. Coming up, we're going to hear from Eric Trump. I know you've been waiting for this. He spoke with Bloomberg earlier today, and we'll hear why he thinks crypto is the future, calling banks antiquated. Those comments next from the son of the next president and the former president of the United States of America. This is Bloomberg Crypto. Welcome back to Bloomberg Crypto. While the industry waits to see how the incoming Trump administration will approach policy, the son of the former and next president, Eric Trump, appeared today at a Bitcoin event in Abu Dhabi. He predicted Bitcoin would top $1 million a piece and said his father, Donald Trump, wants to make the U.S. the crypto capital of the world. Here's part of that conversation.
I'm at the Bitcoin conference because I believe in cryptocurrencies. I believe that cryptocurrencies are the future. Banking is slow as hell. It's antiquated. It doesn't work. It doesn't make any sense that banks run on 9-to-5 schedules 5 days a week. When cryptocurrency, you can trade it in the middle of the night on a Saturday at 12 p.m. While having dinner with your wife or sitting on the couch, you can trade cryptocurrency. The banks are lethargic. They don't work for everybody. They leave most people behind. They're expensive. They're lethargic. They're not inclusive at all. And I think the modern banking system is changing very quickly. I think it's one of the reasons you see BlackRock spending billions in cryptocurrencies, and Fidelity and Schwab and just about every bank under the sun. It's the future. I mean, why do I have to go all over Abu Dhabi to try and find an ATM if I want to pull out $100? By the time you pull out the money, you lose 30% on it based on currency exchange rates plus fees for the ATM. When you can literally pop open your wallet, you can send a link, it takes you 2 seconds to do, and you don't have all those problems. You don't have all those structural problems. And so there's no question to me that times 100, right? Blockchain, there's nothing that can be done in banking that can't be done more efficiently using blockchain. And blockchain's changing the world, whether or not people like it or not. And there's a lot of people that see it, the people who are here at this conference. There's a lot of people who don't. The people who don't see it are the people who are going to get left behind. And so I believe in this technology, and my family believes in it. My father wants America to be the crypto capital of the world, and I'm happy to support it today.
Well, there you have it. Eric Trump speaking to Bloomberg today at the Bitcoin MENA event in Abu Dhabi. A big shift for the Trump family in the last couple of years when it comes to crypto. I mean, Donald Trump called it a scam a few years ago.
Yeah, absolutely.
He called Bitcoin a scam.
He did. And, a lot of people have poo-pooed Bitcoin and then changed course as the price accelerates. If you look at Bitcoin on a chart compared to, for example, NVIDIA, it blows away those gains, right? So the question is about intrinsic value, and it's just a hard question to answer. The same is true with gold.
The same is not true with NVIDIA, which has cash flows, future cash flows.
Right, although the same could be true of the dollar, right? I mean, it depends how far you want to take it. What's backing these things? It's really just a collective agreement that we put value in it.
Hey, thanks for joining us today.
It was a pleasure.
Matt Miller, that is going to do it for Bloomberg Crypto. Join us again next week. This is Bloomberg.